Good evening. Your KASB advocacy team has just finished watching Governor Laura Kelly's second State of the State address, followed by the Republican response from new Senate President Ty Masterson. I think it's fair to say we did not get a lot of detail and not a lot of news was committed on either side. I think kind of both went back. Work together, open Kansas, keep it healthy. I'm not minimizing that, but those were the common themes, and then kind of the differences were what we've tended to hear from the different perspectives. What I'm going to do is maybe go through some of the things that struck me and ask Scott Rothschild and Leah Fleiter to join in a little bit on both, and go that way. I think the governor started by basically saying we need to get all Kansans vaccinated. We need to get the economy open. We need to get kids back in school. That was her starting point. Moved on to talking about the vaccinations, kind of a little defense by saying, Kansas was ranked low or last in getting people vaccinated. She says that's moved up, but we're doing better. We're waiting on federal supply, but the plan is out there, and that's key. She basically tied to address the pandemic. Vaccination is key, but she tied that back to healthcare access, and that brought her back to Medicaid expansion, which she has long supported as both a legislator and a governor. Any thoughts on those areas, guys?
No. Well, I mean, I think, the first 5 or 6 minutes were basically focused on the COVID crisis that we're in. And like you said, then she kind of went into the economy and the things she wants to do to rebuild the economy. And, and I guess we'll have a discussion about what she said about education, which, as you said, she wants to get kids back in the classroom. She praised teachers for getting through this, and one thing she came back to, I think, on the subject of taxes, she kind of went back to that. We don't want to go back to the failed Brownback experiment because that could affect education funding. So she kind of hit that theme too.
Yeah, she kind of said, teachers have done an outstanding job in this pandemic, and I kind of got the sense of, this hit just as we were emerging from the impact of those tax cuts, which she said crippled, schools, and then, the pandemic hits, and she said, she's committed to closing the bank of KDOT and said we need to make smart choices. And she said, we've made she said, what she called tough and pragmatic budget choices that have enabled the state to fund essential services. And I think, she's looking to do that going forward.
Yeah, if any of our viewers is not clear on what we mean by the Bank of KDOT, it is the kind of long-standing practice of shifting funds from like state sales tax resources that are supposed to go to fund the state highway plan over the years, that many times when the budget runs short are diverted back into the state general fund, frankly, to help fund education. I mean, let's be pretty clear, a lot of money during tax cut era, bad economic times, the last recession was done to avoid even deeper cuts in education. And there's a lot of bipartisan support from moving away from that. I might mention under her economic plan, again, a lot of it is kind of directed work with a lot of talk about small business, talk about infrastructure, which of course highway and other transportation spending would be part of, rebuilding the state unemployment system, which came under so much criticism, bringing in people for jobs. But then she talked about something that has a real impact on education as well, as she noted, and that's broadband.
That's right. She noted that she had signed an executive order setting up, a discrete broadband office within her administration, and we all know that access to good high-speed broadband is absolutely critical, not only to kids in this COVID age when schools are going kind of in and out of in-person or remote or hybrid modes of learning, but really that this whole situation has really shown a light on the existing, what we call homework gap, between kids who have broadband and kids who don't, and just how important that is for education. And she mentioned that, and so I think we can look to see some continuing cooperation we hope, between the legislature and the administration to continue to address broadband.
Right. Lot of talk about bipartisanship on her end. And one of those was talking about the bipartisan agreement that the legislature reached over really several years to address constitutional issues and funding, to get a plan that the Supreme Court ultimately approved. And certainly one of her issues is to try to sustain that. And she also pointed out that she predicts that this year, despite the recession and despite a lot of economic problems, that we expect to end the current year this summer with a $600 million ending balance. That's positive. Of course, that doesn't really peek ahead to what next year's may look like, because some of that was achieved by some of the budget cutting and shifts that she did this year as part of her allotment. Tomorrow morning, we'll get a look at the budget details. We'll, of course, share those with you. But again, one of the things, frankly, I love the ceremony of a state of the state, but it's kind of nice to not have everything interrupted by applause like you get. And so she moved right along, and then we turned to Senator Masterson. I think we heard, well, again, we want to work together, that he really stuck to themes that are likely to, suggest where some of the differences will be in those areas. While not specifically rejecting Medicaid expansion, certainly made arguments should be your choice. We don't want a new bureaucratic system. We need to cut taxes to grow the economy. We need to let people keep more of their own money. A lot of emphasis on we're trusting Kansans. Push back against state or perhaps even local restrictions to deal with the pandemic. A lot of talk, people can make their own decisions. They should be allowed to do that. In education, he talked about both the need to get kids back in school, but kind of a twist. On one hand, we need to keep local control, but I forget the exact wording, but certainly talking about what are frankly kind of the buzzwords of letting parents have a greater voice, which is often a way of looking at expanding school choices outside the public system that public dollars would go to support. And that's obviously been very controversial, but I think we're all expecting that will be part of the push. And clearly, as the leader of the Senate, Republicans, I think he signaled the desire to, we're certainly going to be looking at changes in those areas. Any reaction to that or other parts of his response?
Certainly no surprise there would be my reaction. We kind of figured that was coming, and we've seen that throughout the summer and fall.
Yeah, I think he said, I don't know if this was his exact quote, but he said, you should have a choice of educational opportunities. He staked out the ground on taxes and Medicaid expansion and probably a fight over COVID and who's going to be in charge of things in that way. And of course, he said he wants the anti-abortion amendment on the ballot. And it looks like they're going to do that as soon as possible. But yeah, he like the governor, he talked about trying to work across the aisle and try to find common ground and put the partisan politics aside, but definitely staked out several issues that are obviously he and the governor are in conflict over.
Well, at the risk of seeming cynical, having watched this a long time, there's always a tendency when we say we want people to be bipartisan, often means we want the other party to come our direction. And that's really true, whatever your perspective is, because, you're always convinced your view's right. And so you really would encourage people to come along with you. We don't always get there, and of course that's when conflict occurs. We're gonna see what happens this session. Certainly, we've seen this very first week, as some of you who watched our earlier recording would know, the legislature is already taking up tax legislation this week. The Senate is going to be looking tomorrow at a hearing on a bill, excuse me, on income tax cuts and other changes that the governor has already vetoed once. There's now probably a stronger majority for that, although the party balance hasn't changed. The COVID response bills are also legislature looking at ways that would basically keep the status quo in place, extend some of the things we've done, but continue to require a lot of approval of efforts by the governor and a lot of ability for local units to perhaps opt out of those statewide requirements. And as I think we talked about earlier, Leah mentioned, there's several times it was said today, the legislature realized they could be really shut down at any time potentially. And so I think there's a press to get some of those high priorities on the way. And Scott, as you said, both the House and Senate Federal and State Affairs Committees are having unusual Friday hearings this Friday on a constitutional amendment that would let the legislature regulate abortion in the state, as opposed to the recent, well, I guess 2 years old now, Kansas Supreme Court decision on abortion. So that's going to draw a tremendous amount of attention, obviously. I think those hit some of the highlights. Any other thoughts you guys want to share before we wrap up for tonight?
I don't think so. Tomorrow, the real work begins.
It does. And again, will be watching at 9 o'clock. We'll be sending links to a joint meeting of the Senate Ways and Means and House Appropriations Committee, where the governor's new budget director, Adam Proffitt, will be outlining the plan, and then we'll be spending, like everyone else, the next hours and days digging into exactly what that means. We'll share that when we have it, and we'll continue to provide information. And as always, if you have any questions about anything we've talked about or any way we can help you, please feel free to contact any of us, email, text, whatever you can figure out to do. So thank my colleagues for kind of staying with us a little bit later tonight, and we will be talking to you tomorrow. Bye.
Good night.